I'm not co-host.
All right. Can't get this. Do this down a little better. Right. Jennifer, do we have almost everyone in now?
Chair Bonds, we're checking right now. If you can give me 1 minute.
Sure, sure.
Chair Bonds, we have a quorum.
All right. Thank you so very much. And good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee meeting for this day of December 6, 2023. To start, I want to ask each member to enter your name and affiliation in the chat box if you have not already done so. This is how we take attendance, as you well know. Again, a reminder that to use mute when you are not speaking. That also is important. And note that today's meeting is being recorded. We have a few interested members of the public and that would like to have an opportunity to speak at this time. I'm Councilmember Anita Bonds from the District of Columbia. And so I'm happy to present our public speakers for today. Each will have 3 minutes. And we always do this at the beginning of our meeting as much as possible. And so Mr. Bill Pugh, who is representing the Coalition for Smart Growth, and an old and longstanding friend of our committee, Mr. Ted Aburn. So Mr. Pugh, we'll start with you and welcome.
Hi, thank you, Chair Bonds and committee members for allowing me to speak today. My name is Bill Pugh, and I'm a Senior Policy Fellow with the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We are a 26-year-old organization that advocates for walkable, transit-friendly communities with affordable housing as the most equitable and sustainable way for the region to grow and prosper. I'm here today to bring to your attention the issue of non-tailpipe air pollution from cars and trucks. This is an area that has not gotten as much attention, but in recent years, there's growing evidence and studies on the concerns that this has for human and environmental health. We applaud the region's air quality progress over the previous decades, reducing VOCs and NOx pollution. But the mounting evidence on the pollution that comes from vehicle tires, brakes, and the toxic roadway dust that gets kicked up from traffic and how they're harming human environmental health is what I want to bring to your attention. Some of the recent studies show that PM 2.5 and 10 can be very significant contributions from tires and brakes. These particulates from electric vehicles, because of their weight, from the tires can be greater, up to 20% greater. And then this is also getting into our waterways. Half the microplastics are from these tire wear sources. And with your committee's role, we think an education role for the members, that putting non-tailpipe vehicle air pollution into the work program next year would be a great start as a way to get more exposure to this issue and the impact it has in the Washington, D.C. region. A second step would be to connect the work with the MPOs, the transportation planning bodies, in addressing how vehicle miles traveled relate to both these air quality outcomes and other goals, such as reducing the carbon pollution related to climate change in the region. We know that electric vehicles are going to be great in terms of addressing many of the transportation pollutants, but we need to address these other sources as well. Our full comments are in the meeting packet, and we encourage you to look. There's some links to some recent studies. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next, we'll hear from Ted Aburn. Mr. Aburn.
Tad, hold on 1 second. We can't hear you. No, we still can't hear you. Is he a co-host? Hold on 1 second. We're going to try to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, thank you for allowing us to make public comment, and thank you for introducing me as an old friend. I've been called a lot worse. I am Tad Aburn. I'm a 40-year Maryland Department of the Environment employee. 20 of those years I was the air director. About 15 of those years I was an MWAQC member. I'm now retired, and I'm doing a lot of work on environmental justice. People ask me why. It's one of the few areas in my 40-year career I feel like we did not do a good job with it. A lot of us knew there was a problem, and it really did not get addressed. So I am pushing it very hard. I'm here to talk about a couple issues. One is the EJ subcommittee. Thank you, Madam Chair, for getting that going. I think it's very important. They have a very important role. I would like to make sure that the role of the public is very, very upfront in that subcommittee. I did notice in the briefing that there will be members from the general public, and if it was the desire of the committee, I would volunteer to be one of those. I am now working with 4 different environmental justice communities. I have 40 years of air pollution experience. I've done a whole lot of work with experts in the scientific community. So just let me know. I will help out in any way I can. 2 other issues that I wanted to bring up today. You'll get a briefing on some air monitoring going on. Knowing Hannah Ashanafi and Joseph Chikuda, it will be an excellent briefing. However, what it will not probably go into is some of the very, very shocking data that researchers are seeing when they're looking at environmental justice communities. You have researchers at the University of Maryland, George Washington University, Trinity, Howard. I would urge you at some point to get a briefing from these researchers on the analysis and data they are seeing. At a February MWAC meeting, Russ Dickerson provided you all with a short update on air quality issues, and he called the levels in Ivy City, the air pollution levels in Ivy City, alarming. So I would urge you to get a briefing from the researchers. Finally, there's one piece that needs to be also included in a briefing to the subcommittee, and that is the action-oriented component. There's a lot to be done to be good in terms of partnerships and monitoring, but there's a lot of early actions that can be taken right now. The Maryland Department of the Environment has a very action-oriented effort in PG County. It includes enhanced enforcement, diesel activities, fugitive dust activities. You all should get a briefing on the action piece of this. The researchers will tell you why this is such an urgent problem. It does require action right now. With that, I will wrap it up. And again, my comments were submitted in writing as well, so they should be in your package. And Madam Chair, you should feel free to call on me at any time you wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you both for your comments, right on time for who we are and where we are in thinking about air quality and how we move forward. With that said, we will now move to our first formal order of business, which is to approve the meeting summary from the September 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Madam Chair. Kenny Bodie, Prince William County.
Thank you. And a second?
Second by Penny Gross, Fairfax County.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any changes to the summary? Okay, well, hearing none, then the summary is approved. And we didn't have to vote. We have a process where we do not have to always vote on things. So now let's begin the committee reports. We'll hear first from the Technical Advisory Committee. Tom, are you with us?
I am with
Tom
you,
Malou?
Chair Bonds. Thank you.
All
and
right.
members of MWAC. I'll be very brief because you're going to hear a lot of this during today's meeting as well. The Technical Advisory Committee met on November 14th. We first talked about EPA's efforts that had EPA Region 3 staff in the meeting, talking about their efforts about incorporating environmental justice into air quality planning. We then heard from Maryland Department of Environment on the same subject, their efforts in the EJ area. We had a briefing on natural gas microgrids, which are in essence an alternative to traditional diesel generators for backup power and that sort of need in industrial and commercial facilities. We then heard from Jeff King about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which you're also going to hear about today. And finally, we wrapped up talking about exceptional events requests that are being developed by both Maryland and DC. And as you will recall, we've had some influences from wildfires last ozone season that influenced some of the monitoring data in the area, and these packages, exceptional event packages, are being put together to identify and flag those days when we believe poor air quality data was mainly due to those various fires that were going on at the time. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you very, very much. And now we'll hear from the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. Ms. Boggs?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bonds. I will be giving the update today as ACPAC leadership has a conflict today, but it will be very quick. This past Friday, ACPAC launched its 2024 membership recruitment campaign. The campaign runs through January 15th. All the information is available on the website. That means that we have some openings on the committee, and we are publicizing that through obviously our networks, our existing member networks, our COG committees, and public stakeholder groups to get those seats filled. Secondly, regarding environmental justice, now that we have some clarity on how we're moving forward, we will be moving forward with the EJ Toolkit update. As you may remember, back in March, we were approved, ACPAC was approved to move forward with the update to that toolkit. The first one was done in 2017. We will be moving forward with getting out a statement of work for a consultant. We also will be in support of the Environmental Justice Subcommittee that will be taking shape. We will have members on that committee. And then we will also working through some other priorities for 2024. Obviously, equity would be a big portion of that, those priorities. And we're looking forward to working through specifically the environmental justice toolkit, which has been on the forefront of what we're working for, and obviously equity. You'll hear more about the environmental justice subcommittee later on the agenda. And that is all we have for ACPAC today. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now turn to Climate, Energy, and Environment Policy Committee. Mr. King.
Thank you, Chair Bonds. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so the Climate, Energy, Environment Policy Committee met on November 15th. First on the agenda was an update on the state of the climate. We heard from an expert associated with the National Climate Assessment, so we got a good briefing on where things stand with climate change. We then moved to one of the things we've been doing at CPC is having updates from our local governments on their local climate action planning. So we heard from Prince William County on their Community Energy and Sustainability Master Plan, which was recently adopted. So good presentation from Prince William County. Really pleased to see another one of our member jurisdictions adopting an aggressive climate plan. We then heard from Tim Masters. We've, as many of you may know, we have for more than a decade now a data sharing agreement with our electric and gas utilities across the region. So we collect information on electric and gas consumption by sector, by zip code, by jurisdiction, and also information on grid connected renewables. So Tim provided us an update on that. One of the big two of the big points that we heard, one is solar growth is really booming. We've got 72,000 plus solar systems now in the region, so that's great news. And then the other, which is a little bit more challenging news, is the commercial energy consumption increases that we're seeing associated with data centers. So really a big challenge for our region because we have a lot of data centers and they use a ton of electricity. So we heard about that. And then we wrapped it up with something you'll hear today, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program update, and it's on the agenda today. Thank you, Chair Bob.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Now it's an opportunity for both the local and state members to share any information from their jurisdictions. And we're going to try very hard to stay within our time frame. We have about 20 minutes for this. I'll start with Maryland members. You have any updates that you'd like to share?
Sure. This is Roger Thinnell. We're continuing our efforts with EPA, DC, Virginia on our exceptional events. This is very, very time consuming. We also have to work through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware because of Cecil County. So this is occupying a good deal of our time. And that's it.
All right. Virginia?
Again, this is Tom Ballou. Most of our work has been involved in the Climate Pollution Reduction Act grant program. We've been doing a lot of public outreach into the western part of our state this week, and then to the eastern part of our state next week. And you'll hear more about the regional work that's going on in DC from Jeff King later. That's all.
All right. So anything else from Virginia or Maryland? All right, we'll turn to Mr. King to talk with us about DC.
Chair Bonds, I also have a few updates to give for DC. I'm not sure if Ms. King on, but I just wanted to note on our Volkswagen and Deere funding, we have made some good progress on switching out some of the older switcher engines at the Ivy City Rail Yard. They're actually been shipped to Kentucky, so we're hoping to have them repowered in the next year. And we're applying for some new DERA grants, to electrify a fire truck, trash truck, and several transit buses. So hopefully we'll have some new projects going there. We're also working really hard to finalize our Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulations. by the end of the calendar year. We're hoping to get them in place. So we're working very hard on that, pushing that forward, and also working with Maryland on exceptional events. So thanks to MDE for all of their help. All I know.
All right. Are there any other state air agencies that would like to report anything else, or any local air organizations that would like to report anything? Maybe some of our cities. All right, we have completed that task in about 3-4 minutes, so we have some time. All right, well, I'll move the agenda along. Item 4 is the election of our 2024 officers, and the slate of officers that were presented to the committee for approval. I'd like to ask the nominating committee to be recognized, including Shannon Moore from Frederick County, Colin Burrell, District of Columbia, Kurt McPike from the City of Alexandria. And this was the team, and they have put together our slate of officers for 2024. So if each of the members of the nominating committee could just maybe let us see your face. All right, one. All right, well, we thank you for your work. And I believe that Jeff King does want to make a report regarding the District of Columbia. So we'll have to go back a little bit. Mr. King, am I correct?
I'm not quite sure what report you're speaking of, Chair Bonds.
Well, it was mentioned that you may have some comments you wanted to make about the District of Columbia. So that's what so perhaps I'm trying to understand. I see what's going on. All right, I'm trying to read this this manifold, this playboard that is before me. So my mistake. All right.
No problem. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. So back to item 4, the election of our officers. Our officers that are proposed on our slate is the chairperson would be Kenny Bodie from Prince William County, Virginia. And Mr. Bodie, if you're with us, would you light up your frame?
Yes, I am here, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And from Maryland Vice Chair, Tom Donago, Prince George's County. Tom's already led up. And Virginia Vice Chair, David Snyder, Falls Church, Virginia. Mr. Snyder, are you with us? And from the District of Columbia, I get an opportunity to serve as the vice chair. So thank you very much for those nominations. Do I hear a motion to accept the slate of officers?
Gross moves approval of the slate.
Thank you very much, Penny. Thank you. Second? Is there a second?
I'll second Stuart Adams, College Park.
Thank you, College Park. Okay, all in favor? And this time we will vote all in favor. Would you signify with the sign of aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And those that are opposed? Okay, hearing none, then we can report unanimous that we now have new officers. And I want to congratulate Mr. Bodie and the other vice chairs. for their duties, for taking on duties in 2024. Thank you very much for your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Now we're going to move to the hyper-local community monitoring panel. This is a very important panel, and we're going to hear about the Loudoun Climate Project and the District Department of Energy and Environment. So we'll be hearing from Mr. Tandy and Mr. Jaconta. We'll start with Mr. Tandy.
So, greetings. I'm Chris. Just wanted to say, glad to be here and thank you for having me. I'll try to keep this as quick as I can. I'm going to talk a little bit about Loudoun Climate Project, our air monitoring program, particulate pollution, and purple air monitors. I get the sense that this group knows quite a bit about particulate pollution already, so I'll be pretty quick on those bits. If I could get the next slide, please. Just a bit about my organization. Loudoun Climate Project is, we like to say that we're the most grassroots climate group in Loudoun County. We were formed by combining two previous groups. One was a bit more activist, and the other was a bit more educational. We primarily try to educate the public and policymakers about the climate crisis and related factors. I'm one of three founders. I was not the original president of the organization, but I have been for about the last year and a half. And I'm not going to read my slides to you, but we're all volunteer, and so far we haven't, really gone after grant funding. We're funded by the generosity of the Loudoun public so far. Next slide, please. Little bit about Loudoun County. We have sort of a mix of rural and suburbs. We have a few known major air pollution sources like Dulles Airport, some energy generation and compressor stations. We have a huge amount of data centers, over I want to say over 115 is a safe thing for me to say. Those are mostly in sort of the Ashburn area, near where you see Potomac Energy Center on the map, but not quite exactly. We do have some environmental justice zones, 3 in Sterling and 1 in Leesburg, based on the Climate Economic Justice Screening tool by the Council of Environmental Quality. I'm guessing you all know how to find that, but if you don't, Google Justice 40 and you'll find a page on the White House website with a link to that map. And that's the one in the lower left, is those EJ zones. Next slide, please. Real quick, what particulate pollution is. It comes from all sorts of things. As mentioned, it's not just fossil fuels. Some comes from brake dust and tires. We're mainly interested in PM 2.5, a lot of which comes from combustion of various things, forest fires, fossil fuels. Yeah. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit about this. There's a lot of particulates come from combustion, forest fires, industry, burning gas in our cars and things like that. And then there's these two types, primary and secondary, which indicate whether something is directly emitted or it forms in the atmosphere through a chemical process. And we talked about tire and brake dust. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. So why is a climate group monitoring particulates? The short answer is it's something that we can monitor that mostly comes from combustion. We're not really able to go and put, like, say a CO2 monitor on the exhaust of Dominion's power generation plants, for example, or methane sensors on the 2 compressor stations that we have in Loudoun, but we can monitor ambient particulates. It's something that we all largely agree is bad to have in the air for health reasons, and something that hopefully motivates the public and policymakers. my own experience has been that people can be sometimes more motivated by health concerns than climate change. Maybe it's the immediacy of it. I don't know, but in this way, we're able to monitor something that comes from a lot of the same places as greenhouse gas emissions, but in a way that connects through public health. Next slide, please. Yeah, in my research, I found that there might be a direct connection between particulates and climate change. Not to say that particulates are causing the entire climate crisis or anything. It's certainly only one factor, but and this one's kind of new to me, but I did find a study, and I've heard of particulates causing faster ice melt, which reduces reflectivity, but I haven't found sufficient studies on that. If anyone has found a study on particulates contributing to ice melt, I'd love to be aware of that. Next slide, please. This is a little bit about particulate regulatory history. Not to spend a whole lot on this, but the main point is that EPA regulates particulates, and those regulations evolve over time and get redefined periodically, and they're likely to be revised again. 35 micrograms per cubic meter of air is the current limit for daily average. That's not being proposed for revision. What they're looking at revising is the annual average of, and I believe it's going to go from 12 to maybe 8, 9, or 10. And yep, that's it for this slide. Health impacts of particulates. There's a whole bunch, obviously, of health impacts on this list. I don't really think anyone seriously disputes that particulates have a negative health effect on not just humans, but animals. And the quick summary of it is that particulate pollution contributes to early death. As far as I've read, there's no level that's considered not harmful. 2021 data says 7 million. I was able to find more current data that puts global premature deaths per year at 8.3 million. It's it's a serious health it's a serious health threat. Next slide, please. So we use purple air monitors, and mainly the reason that we use them is they're inexpensive. They're around $300 each. The older ones, the PA2s monitor PM1, PM2.5, and PM10. The newer ones that we're using now are the PA2 flexes, which include VOCs. We're kind of glad to have the VOC detection. A while back, there was the DEQ variance proposal that would have allowed data centers to run their diesel generators all the time, the ones that are for emergencies, and held to a different standard than generators that are supposed to run all the time. And had that variance been approved, we might have started seeing things like benzene and formaldehyde on our VOC detection. I'm not entirely sure, but we're trying to have as many of those in place as we can, just in case something like that were to occur. And the other reason we use purple airs is they're easy to set up. And I like to remind everyone all the time that anyone can just go and buy a purple air monitor and set it up their home or wherever. You don't need Loudon Climate Project to do an air monitor, but some people like to have us do the air monitor for them. Next slide, please. Purple Air has an application programming interface. And this has changed a little bit recently. Compared to other APIs, it's pretty simple and easy to use and gives you access to the historical data. The main change is that it costs a little bit of money now. They used to have a CSV download option that was free, and you could just go and fill out a form and specify a time range and download as much CSV data as you wanted. They don't do that anymore. Now you buy points and then you spend points. So we went and bought some points, and now we're using those. But the data is available to anyone, and it's formatted in a pretty good way. It's easy enough to use to build charts and maybe even application around. Yeah, we're good for this slide. Wanted to mention the AQI in case anyone's not familiar with it. The AirNow system uses the AQI, the Air Quality Index. AQI is EPA's color-coded tool for telling the public how clean or polluted the air is. It converts concentrations of fine particles to a number on a scale of 0 to 500. EPA, as part of that revision, is likely changing the upper end of the range for the good AQI category. The chart on the right is kind of how the MAC scale relates to the AQI categories. So you can kind of see those like revised. The revised breakpoints on the right are actually the current one, I believe, not the proposed revision. Yeah. EPA is also setting the 100 value of the index at the current level for the 24-hour PM 2.5 standard, which is 35. An AQI of 100 is the upper end of the moderate range, and the level above which EPA begins cautioning at-risk groups. In addition, EPA is setting the upper end of the unhealthy for sensitive group range at 55 by setting it a level of the revised annual PM 2.5 standard, which, I may have not gotten that right. Let's see, they're retaining the existing level of 500 for the upper end of the hazardous category, and they're retaining the existing level 150 and 250 for the upper ends of the unhealthy and very unhealthy, respectively. Next slide, please. So we're getting into sort of my organization's strategy of sort of how we do our monitoring program. We have 10 monitors right now. We've got a couple more ready to place. And people volunteer locations. We've worked with a business or two in the past, but mostly all of the locations are people's homes. And we try to give priority to areas that are close to known large emitters and EJ areas. We're trying to add 10 more. We're certainly open to working with churches and private schools and other organizations. We're probably going to try to avoid putting any more on businesses, just because sometimes businesses out of nowhere will go out of business, and then we have like a location issue. We generally ask for people's homes that they we kind of ask how long they're planning on living in the home and look for places where they're going to remain in the home for 3 years minimum. Our limiting factor right now is really locations. We need people to volunteer locations using the form on the website, and we're hoping to add another 10 monitors and get to 20 this year. And it's kind of important to have a lot of locations because the purple air monitors are really pretty localized. They're not really intended to be representative of a large area. And one location can have like an artificial spike once in a while. the example that comes to mind is our Aldi location is a farm, and once in a while the folks there will be burning a huge pile of leaves or something like that. And you'll have like a spike in just that one location for part of a day. Next slide, please. We're doing our very best to make all of our data available. It's sort of part of the mission here is to make as much data available to whoever wants to use it. And if you just want to get the data, you can go and download it off of our website, and that's fine. But we're also hoping to partner with some data analysts as we're able to. And as we've got the time, I have a little bit of a background in software and working on a historical viewing application. Let's see. It's worth mentioning that when a homeowner volunteers a location, they're expected to provide electricity and a Wi-Fi connection. The monitors themselves really don't use much of either. Electric is probably, I'm guessing it's probably comparable to like a smoke detector, and the bandwidth is so small that it's negligible. I've got one at my home, and I've never noticed any impact on my internet connection. And we do maintain the monitors. They once in a while have an issue where maybe like a SD card will fail, and we have to go out and replace an SD card, or sometimes people will change their Wi-Fi or something like that. So we keep an eye on how all the monitors are doing, and if one's having an issue, not able to connect or something like that, we try to schedule like a home visit and figure out what needs to happen with that. Next slide, please. So getting into some data, we've had a little bit of data analysis done recently, and this is kind of just showing all of the monitors on one chart for January 2022 through late October 23. And that huge spike that you see there around June of 2023, I believe, is the forest fires that were in Canada. The other spikes, not real sure, but some of them could potentially be artificial if it's only one. If it's only one monitor, could be, but see on the next slide. And yeah, that one was that's PM 2.5 data, by the way, on both the last slide and this one. This is a daily averages table, and that stripe of red in the middle is the forest fires in Canada. But the one below it is not. And I mostly included this to illustrate why we think it's important to have a whole lot of monitors. So that, because like a one-off spike, one monitor somewhere isn't all that representative. But if you have, a major pollution event somewhere, it'll show up like this, where it's crossing a whole bunch of monitors, sort of a regional thing. Yeah, we talked about how you can sometimes have like high monitors or high numbers on one particular monitor. Sometimes people will, like with big lawnmowers, will spike their numbers using like a ride-on lawnmower. So all of that is to say we're trying to have a whole lot of monitors all over Loudoun so that we can collect a whole bunch of data and show more regional trends rather than really localized ones. And next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you all. I think the last slide is my sources slide. If we're recording this, it might make sense to get that on there. Thank you very much. I'm available for any questions that you might have, and that also includes after this meeting. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if I can help with anything, and my contact information is in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tandy, for that very interesting presentation. Again, I'll sound the alarm. Are there any questions from anyone? All right, no, well, we're not hearing any questions, so we will move right along to the District Department of Energy and Environment and hear from Mr. Chakanta.
Thank you, Chair Bonds. I'm in Hannah's office, and I will say I apologize for the tie. I'm not trying to take over Maryland. We're having a celebration at work today. We're celebrating our heritage. So I'm celebrating my Baltimore heritage today. Yeah, so we wanted to talk to y'all for a moment about our project where we mobilely mapped air quality in several district neighborhoods. So next slide. First, just so everyone's grounded, this is what our current air quality monitoring network looks like, our FRMs and FEMs. So these are the ones that meet federal standards. And we do have a very robust network in the district, but it only gets you so far when you're trying to look at individual neighborhoods. We have ones in four of our wards, soon to be a fifth one down in Ward 8. But that still leaves 3, 5, 2 uncovered, and even there, what could be the case in Buzzard Point might not necessarily be what it's like up by Union Station in Ward 6. So that's why we want to do this project. And next slide, please. This isn't the only project we're doing. As I just mentioned, we are looking at expanding our monitoring network. So we have another station down in Ward 8 by the end of the fiscal year. We're also exploring some of the same technologies we just heard about, such as the purple airs, and have some funding available to start getting those out in the next fiscal year as well. We did get a grant from EPA to install 3 park bench monitors with community engagement elements. And we have an RFA out right now for that. So get the word out. We're looking for partners. And then finally, we are trying to expand our community involvement in a lot of this so that we're making sure we're putting the monitors where the community thinks it's important, trying to teach them about the nitty-gritty of air quality through our Air Ambassadors program, and then hopefully getting them involved in hosting sensors like our last presenter was. Next slide. But now we want to talk about our specific project. So we worked with Aclima. They're a company that's using modern mobile emissions monitoring. They essentially have a car that has sensors that can track a variety of different pollutants, PM 2.5, black carbon, volatile organic compounds, to name a few. And they just drive all around. And every second they're taking a measurement. Of course, if the car's driving really fast, you're not going to get as robust measurements as if it's stuck in traffic. But then, of course, you're getting a lot more air pollution if it's stuck in traffic. But what they'll do is take all these measurements and aggregate them to 100-meter segments. So you can, as you go down the road, you can start to compare apples to apples. So they did this for about 2 weeks in June. We did delay the project, so it was right after those that one fire incident with Canada in early June. So it started right after that, so we would have a more of a picture of what's going in our neighborhoods, because we all knew that air quality was really bad during that event. Next slide. These are the 3 neighborhoods that they ran the cars through during the time period. We saw Ivy City and Brentwood. Over on the east, we had the Mayfair neighborhood, and then in south, we had Buzzard Point. So those were the three neighborhoods. It's 5 census tracts in total, and you can read the list of pollutants there. And I'm going to talk about a few of the ones we found that were most interesting. And next slide. So just a little bit of how to look at these maps. The maps all have a color scale of 5 different colors, with the lowest 20th percentile of values being in that the brightest color, the yellow, and then the worst 20th percentile of values in the bottom color, and then every other percentile. So we can certainly say that comparatively, wherever the colors are darker, it's worse. Now, this is not necessarily related to the health-based standards, because we'll see, at least on one of the slides, all of the values are well below, or well better than the federal health-based standards. One other thing to note is that these are median values. So there were obviously values that were both higher and lower. This is the median of all the values collected during this 2-week period. And then the dotted lines are the boundaries of where the cars drove. Next slide. So first, we're going to look at particulate matter that we just heard a lot about. And we can see that there are some areas with elevated levels of PM in all 3 of these neighborhoods. We do have the federal standards up at the top. During the course of a 24-hour period, 35 micrograms per meter cube is what's considered unhealthy for PM. And then over the course of the year, it is 12 micrograms per meter cube. Now, none of the values are getting up to that 35 during the course of the day experience. So we don't think there's any issues with this short term from what we're seeing. We do see some values, though, that are above 10. Now, one thing I will point out, though, is that that's an annual exposure. So even though you're seeing this for just 2 weeks, it's quite likely that you're not going to be, these aren't violating the NAAQS. And I think we can say for certain, at least in River Terrace, which is one of the highest PM 2.5 values, that our monitor that's right there was not exceeding the NAAQS during this time period. So as a point of comparison, it's higher levels, but it's not quite violating. Now you can see both in Brentwood and Ivy City and in Mayfair that it's the highways. A lot of this is going to be coming from diesel pollutants. It's something we expected. In Buzzard Point and then in the northeast portion of Brentwood, those are probably not diesel pollutants that are causing those. We'll see this in the next slide as a point of comparison, but these are likely more due to dust or road construction or some other type of particulate source. Next slide. Here we have black carbon. Black carbon is an element of PM 2.5. It is considered carcinogenic, and it is not. It does not have a NAAQS, so that's why we didn't put one up there. But it is very associated with diesel pollution. This is the black soot that comes out of a diesel vehicle. So you can see that Mayfair in the middle. It's the Anacostia Freeway and Benning Road where it's very elevated. On New York Avenue and Brentwood Road, and to a lesser extent Rhode Island Avenue is very elevated in those communities. Though there are spots in Buzzard Point, black carbon does not seem to be as problematic down there overall. And looking at those two maps back and forth, you can see where the PM is and the black carbon is not. That is indicative of the source being dust of some sort. Whereas when you go back and forth and they're lining up, that's an indicator that it is the diesel vehicles. The next slide. NO2 is also indicative of vehicle traffic. This could be gasoline cars or diesel vehicles. And again, our major roadways are lighting up as expected. But the good story is if you look up at the NAAQS, we're on the upper right of 100 ppb for 1 hour. We're not anywhere close to that when it comes to NO2. So even though these values are dark on the map and we clearly know there's vehicle traffic there, this is a good story that NO2, which leads to asthma exacerbations, is not as problematic in these neighborhoods. Next slide. So this one's a little different. We're looking at volatile organic compounds. These are often carcinogens, and they often lead to the creation of ozone pollution. They did this a little differently. They looked at, they compared it to other pollutants in the air to look at where it was likely due to combustion, probably from non-road engines, or whether it was due to evaporation, like from a gas station or an auto body shop. And the orange ones are the ones that they think are combustion sources, probably non-road engines. And we can see that when it comes to total VOCs, it's the north part of Buzzard Point where you're seeing a lot of this, and then all throughout Brentwood and Ivy City. We're still doing some diagnosing of what some of these sources are, because we think that it is a lot of construction. We know that, for instance, there was construction going on down in Mount Olivet, West Virginia, down in the south of Ivy City during this time period. So we think that that's what's causing this data to show up, because there's not a source there that would be permanent. Though we do see, especially in Brentwood and Ivy City, some are associated with known auto body shops and gas stations. The biggest one, we're still diagnosing, that one right by the church in Brentwood. And I think that was my last slide. Yes, so any questions, let us know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Jakuta. Any questions? Any comments? I think, Roger, your name popped up. You might.
Yes, this is Roger
Okay.
Fennell from the Maryland Department of the Environment. Joseph, is there a way to combine purple air monitoring stationary into this layout, or is there not?
We're working on trying to integrate all of our different data sources through we have access to the Esri GIS mapping portal. So we're working on trying to do that. So in the near future, we hope to be able to do that. But yes, that's something we'd like to do. And we're also trying to, as we look to go out with a purple air and probably some other low-cost sensor network, we're looking to use this map to inform some of these maps to inform some of our locations, because again, this is a 2-week period. So, if a source wasn't operating during that 2-week period, like may have been the case in Ivy City, we wouldn't have noticed it. Or there could be these temporary sources from construction that may not be operating throughout the year. So I think that having a network of low-cost sensors that's operating 24/7 throughout the year will really augment this work.
Thank you. Follow-up question: do you need a contract with Aclima to actually put more data in?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I have a lighthearted question. Can I go ahead?
All right.
This is Virginia
yes,
Burke.
please. All right, I see you, Ms. Burke. Okay.
Yes, Virginia Burke with the Maryland Department of Transportation. Lighthearted question. Many of us work in the clean vehicle space, who are also in air quality. The lighthearted question is about your photo up on the slide. Is it a zero emission vehicle that is doing the mobile source air collection?
One of them was a hybrid. That they are starting to transition to EVs for it, but the charging becomes problematic, because it does, while charging is improved, being able to operate 24. I mean, they didn't operate for a few hours overnight, but it's pretty much 24/7 operation. So it's really hard to find time to charge. So they did work with one hybrid and one EV.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both for very interesting presentations. Now we are ahead of the dial. So we'll move to item 6, which is the environmental justice and air quality planning. We're going to hear from Jeff and Jen. They are going to talk about the thoughts and the plans as it relates to this process. We have a slide up already, so take it away, Jeff and Jen.
Thank you, Chair Bonds. Yes, I'll give a little quick background and then turn it over to Jen to walk you through the approach and next steps. So next slide. So to just set the table here, just a refresher on the MWAC mission. The main primary mission of MWAC is to formulate, adopt, and submit, along with the states, DC, Maryland, Virginia, air quality plans at the regional level for incorporation into the state implementation plan. So the main mission is really to work with the states who have primary responsibility for the SIP development, and MWAC is able to bring together both the locals, the states, and the transportation folks to work through that process. The other area of important mission is to develop air quality maintenance plans, which is a type of SIP, which includes measures and implementation commitments in the SIP to be implemented by either the local governments, the states, and ultimately, these things are federally enforceable through the EPA once approved by the EPA. Also in the mission, and I think this is a bit of where the effort on EJ and equity fall in, is to fulfill any other functions and obligations necessary for promulgation and maintenance of regional air quality policies, plans, and programs as may be assigned by federal and state statute. And then ultimately, at the request of state or local jurisdictions, perform any other functions to improve regional air quality. So again, it's a local state collaboration. The main mission is SIPs, but we do have the ability to look at other things we may want to do in the region to improve air quality. So next slide. And so I think everybody on the call knows most of the background here. Back in May, when you adopted your fiscal year 24 work program and budget, there was a motion made and seconded and approved to include an objective in the work plan to advance environmental justice and community engagement, equitable regional policies, and ultimately a goal to develop a plan to address environmental justice and air quality planning. As you may recall, in your last meeting, you established an environmental justice subcommittee to support this work and help guide this work. And Jen, under Jen's leadership as the lead staff of the committee, there have been discussions of both the budget and the executive committee leading us to today's conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen to walk you through the approach and next steps.
Sure. So thanks, Jeff. Next slide. So, the approach. So what the plan is and the approach moving forward is obviously, as we've been directed and as we've gotten feedback from MWAC members, is to develop an action plan. And this plan would assist our members on how they can consider equity when implementing air quality policies, projects, and programs. And of course, as this is MWAC, this is going to be specific to air quality. We will have the Environmental Justice Subcommittee that will be leading this work. They will be under the direction of the full membership body. However, the subcommittee will be taking the lead and working with staff and also a consultant to put together the plan and to also seek input from a variety of stakeholders. And those stakeholders we have in 3 separate groups. We have stakeholders which are MWAC members. We have stakeholders from the public, which is the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. And then we have external stakeholders, which those are organizations that are experts in environmental justice, equity, and doing that work on the ground. Now, the plan itself will be a voluntary plan. Local and state members will be able to voluntarily choose to implement and enforce what comes out of the plan within their own jurisdictions. Next. So when putting together the list of, again, kind of the list of project activities, which we're going to go over now, and then we're going to go over a little bit about the budget and then the committee structure. Of course, all of this did come from feedback from MWAC, from the actions that they took at previous meetings, and then as Jeff mentioned, from subsequent committee discussions with the budget committee and also the executive committee.
So the first one here on the list is to finalize the formation of this subcommittee and the membership structure, which we will be discussing in a couple of moments. And then providing support for this subcommittee over the next 12 months. So we have within the draft budget that you will see, we have quarterly meetings of this environmental justice subcommittee to do this work over the next year. Now, another activity within this is obviously hearing back from all of our stakeholder groups. That is going to be an important piece of this, and it's something that we want to obviously start the process off with. The input that we hear and the feedback that we hear from the three main stakeholder groups will be used to then develop an action plan. And the plan, we do want it to be, we've heard from members, it needs to be action oriented and include measures that members can strive to achieve and implement within their own jurisdictions. So again, the development of the action plan itself will be derived from input that we hear from our MWAC members, from our ACPAC members, and then also from our external stakeholders as well. Next slide. So the budget, the total budget is just shy of $224,000. This budget would be a 12-month project, and it is made up of a combination of staff costs and then also consultant costs. So the good news about this budget is that we have funds, we have existing funds to cover this cost. As of right now, planning this for a 12-month project with covering the activities that I just mentioned, we can cover the cost of this project at 100% through the use of unexpended funds that have just been built up over the last number of years. So that is the good news. There is no need to request additional funds at this point in time. Now, anything that if we receive any additional tasks that are requested from members, or if we think that this could potentially go on, become longer than a 12-month project, then at that point in time, we will need to have a conversation with members, put together a revised budget and discuss it. But again, 12 months, we're covered for the next year, for the next 12 months. Next slide. Okay, so now I wanted to briefly go over the subcommittee role and then finally the proposed membership structure. So we've already kind of gone over this as of this subcommittee being established by MWAC. We know that happened and that was done based on MWAC's commitment to incorporating environmental justice and equity into its work program areas. So the role of the subcommittee is to put together policies, initiatives that our member jurisdictions can implement should they so choose within their jurisdictions, on how to incorporate policies, initiatives, or projects that are related to air quality. So in addition to the role of putting together this action plan, their role will also be to provide, to get feedback and to work with our three main stakeholder groups with roundtable discussions and to work collaboratively with them to get their feedback and their input in order to develop this plan in coordination with staff and consultant support. We do have a sunset date for the subcommittee, and the sunset date would correspond with essentially the budget. So we have a budget for a 12-month budget. The sunset date would essentially be 12 months. It would start from the kickoff meeting and it would sunset upon delivering the final action plan to MWAC members. Next slide. And lastly, I wanted to go over the proposed membership structure. So we had some really good conversations and had some comments regarding the membership structure of the subcommittee. We did hear and had feedback that, the smaller the committee would be better. Try not to have this as a very large subcommittee, but also we heard feedback that it needs to be representative. We want to make sure that, DC, Maryland, and Virginia is represented on this subcommittee. So the proposal is a 10-member subcommittee. 5 members that would be covering our local members and local jurisdictions, with 1 of those being in DC, 2 of those being Maryland, 2 of those being Virginia. The 2 Maryland and DC, though we would want those to be from different jurisdictions to make sure that we have more members that have an opportunity to participate in this subcommittee. Now, we are proposing 3 members that would represent the states, 1 from DC, 1 from Maryland, 1 from Virginia, and then 2 members that would be represented by the public. And those would be 2 members from the Air and Climate Public Advisory Committee. And those would be appointed by the ACPAC chair. So that is the proposal that we're putting forth in terms of the membership structure. And I have one last slide I just wanted to mention. We have our staffing set up on this. I wanted to introduce Robert Christopher, who's in the room with us. He will be the lead staff for this subcommittee work, and he will be supported by myself, Jeff King, and Leah Boggs. So following our discussion here today, following this meeting, you will be getting email from Robert, and we will be starting the process of asking for volunteers to serve on this subcommittee.
Thank you very much for your report. I want to start with, if you don't mind, I want to start with some thoughts about what has been presented. Number 1, if you could go back to the slide that does the membership. Thank you. Yes, great. The public, I'd like to see, since we have 3 so-called states represented, I think in fairness, it would be appropriate to have and add an additional public representative. And that would give us a, I think that way everyone would have an opportunity. I'm not going to scream about the local jurisdictions and DC having 1 slot, okay? But I am going to scream about the public because, you know, this is something that was done under my watch as chair, and I don't want anyone to think that we are going to discount the importance of the public. So I would certainly recommend that we add an additional public slot. And I guess that's to Jen and to Jeff.
Yes, we can. Yep, we can make those changes, and that does make sense as the membership of ACPAC does include public representatives from Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So we can, when we're speaking with the chair of ACPAC and the vice chair of ACPAC, we can make sure that that is relayed when they're discussing their appointments to this committee.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have thoughts, suggestions?
Hi, this is Kristen Mink in Montgomery County. I want to express my appreciation for that suggestion, Chair Bonds, to add the 3rd seat. I think that's a great call. And if we could add on that the public members should be folks who are currently active, have been active in the environmental justice space, of course.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Question also, if I may, the goal of the subcommittee, how is it different, the way it's written up here, how is it different from, say, the creation of the toolkit or the updating of the toolkit and resource guide that we discussed at previous meetings?
That's actually a great question. So there will not be a resource guide. So following the September MWAC meeting, the initial proposal was to develop a toolkit and a resource guide. Following that, with some discussions that we had with our subcommittees, it was clear that that there wasn't as much interest in those two pieces. Instead, the members really wanted to see an action guide. So we are shifting now from the toolkit resource guide to now an action guide itself, an action plan, sorry, an action plan. Now, Leah had mentioned that in her update with ACPAC, that ACPAC will also be developing a toolkit. That is something that they will be doing separately, but we're hoping that it will be done kind of in conjunction with this work that MWAC is doing. So the pieces kind of fall together. The majority of that work for the toolkit is going to be done in more close coordination with CPC, but ACPAC will be providing updates as well to MWAC. Leah, do you want to add?
Yeah, and the focus of the EJ toolkit update would be on new public engagement practices and strategies. So the 2017 toolkit focused on community engagement with 9 approaches, but obviously that was 6 years ago. There's been new ways to engage communities, and so we'll be focusing more so on community engagement and those strategies, but across not only AIR, because ACPAC is a public advisory committee to both MWAC and CPC. It will focus on community engagement across climate, energy, and air areas. And as far as the action plan, it's going to be more, I would say, implementation focused in terms of environmental justice. So that's why we're hoping that they work in parallel and complement each other. Engagement with the toolkit, community engagement, and then the action plan more implementation oriented. So that one will inform the other.
Okay, I'm still not entirely clear that I understand the difference here. So that when you say implementation, you're yeah, I'm still not clear that I understand the difference.
Well, in terms of we're working to develop a statement of work, but I'll focus on the EJ toolkit update. So in terms of approaches, we're working with talking about involving on the ground equity, environmental justice organizations that are engaging community members. We're talking about science-based communication. We're talking about relaying equity as it relates to the community's health information. We're talking about how to support community members getting involved in environmental justice. So that is sort of the portion or the area of community engagement. But in terms of action oriented, we're working to develop what that would look like, because as we know, engaging the community is one piece of environmental justice, bringing them into the conversation. So, and then that's only one piece, but we're looking at how implementation is more about, I would say, looking at the material conditions of vulnerable populations and how they're actually being changed for the positives. So that would be, to me, that would be more of an action plan or implementation plan for equity, as opposed to just kind of looking at how to communicate ideas, equity and environmental justice ideas to the community. So I hope I explained that a little better for you.
And the purpose of the subcommittee really is to help guide what is important for that action plan. So in some sense, that's a question that's not yet been answered. And I think we'll want the subcommittee's guidance on what kind of program, policy, project, what kind of areas you think are important to focus on as we develop the plan. But the toolkit is much more education or more engagement, outreach, communications with focus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then looping back to, when we started this the conversation that led to the establishment of the subcommittee, in May and then in September, that the conversation was generated by, when we were talking about the SIP and whether or not we should or wanted to include any reference to environmental justice in the SIP. And I think the conclusion was that we were, not required to, and thus not going to do that now. But also, I believe that we received a flag from staff that we do expect it to go into the next SIP in a couple of years or less, I suppose now. And so, it would be useful for the subcommittee to be able to, as part of what we're tasking them with, to keep an eye on that movement and be prepared to do it. And so would that be, looking at something like that, would that be included within the goals and tasks of the subcommittee as it's currently written?
I think it would be a fair topic for the subcommittee. I defer really to maybe Tom Ballou, the DAC chair. The balance here is we view this as a local initiative, and I think the states states really are in a regulatory environment dealing with EPA, and so they have special considerations as to guidance, formal federal guidance on what they can and can't do or should or shouldn't do as it relates to what goes into various SIP and the elements of a state implementation plan. I think the thinking was that when you're doing a maintenance plan or an attainment SIP, when you start getting into development of the control measures, so the strategies and actions that reduce emissions and improve air quality, that's where we likely would see an elevated interest in addressing EJ inequity.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. I just want to make sure that as the SIP requirements continue to evolve, and given the fact that it's going to pass through here, that since we're establishing this subcommittee, that I just want to make sure that the way that we've laid it out, doesn't preclude us from being able to put some extra time and effort into, looking into that as it potentially becomes necessary in some form or fashion in the very near future.
Yeah, this is Tom Ballou. Just wanted to add in the fact, and we've had a little bit of a discussion of this same topic in the budget committee meeting, and that just whatever requirements for environmental justice that would go into a state implementation plan would have to originate from EPA. And they have not done that yet. We've already talked about that in previous meetings, but I think it would be a subject for conversation once we know what EPA is and what the types of inclusions of environmental justice issues need to be included in future SIPs. So I just would say that we'd have to have that information first before we had a real discussion of what would go into future SIPs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would it be, since we only meet, a handful of times a year, and this currently has a 1-year sunset on it, I just want to make sure that we don't bump into red tape down the road if and when this becomes more relevant or prescient. Can we have something on there that just indicates that should the need arise or should the opportunity arise, that this is something that the subcommittee could potentially gather data on or make recommendations about to the full body?
Again, I don't want to speak for the other jurisdictions, but I think that would be an appropriate approach. Again, I do point back to the fact that Jeff already mentioned, the SIPs are submitted by the states, developed by the states to EPA. And, I think the qualifying them as recommendations is probably the best way of doing it, because again, we all have our own act. We have in Virginia our own environmental justice statute that we have to abide by. So there are going to be differences perhaps between jurisdictions and how we approach any requirements for SIPs.
So when you say including, qualifying them as recommendations, would there be space for this subcommittee to make recommendations about things that MWAC should discuss or consider in regards to this conversation, or should this subcommittee not be engaged in that? Or is the idea that the subcommittee should not be engaged in that part of the conversation at all?
I'm trying to. I think certainly this committee is be at the appropriate time would be an appropriate thing for them to discuss. That what's would be coming before MWAC and then as any SIP would be the approval of the overall document and what's in it. Not only the purpose of the SIP itself, whatever air quality situation we're trying to address, but also any other EPA requirements or requirements of that document, and the discussion of what would go in there could be had by the full body at that time. Is just my thought on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree that makes sense. That makes sense. And considering, that we may want to be thinking about if there's a new addition to something, a new addition to what's being required in the SIP, and we're considering whether or not to approve, that what we're getting meets those standards, especially within a new bucket of work. That may be something that we would want this subcommittee to be on the, ahead of the game in taking a look at.
Well, if I might add, Kristen, the thought behind the origin of this subcommittee was that it would have the opportunity to look in depth at justice type issues and to be able to bring them back to MWAC, and as members of MWAC would be able to sort of review it and decide whether or not and how it would be included. But the subcommittee is definitely a part of the process where the SIPs are prepared. But the subcommittees would have a very specific niche or interest, and it would be expressed in that manner. So that was the original thought. And let's just remember the subcommittee is a part of this whole, and it's not going to, the goal is not that it sort of segment itself away from the whole process. So
absolutely,
it's still air quality in the region.
Of course.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Jim, I think I see are you? No. Okay.
I've had my hand up for a little while.
All right, please go ahead.
A couple of things. Well, two questions, or I guess two questions, but one's more of a point. I made this point back in the executive committee. I fully, by the way, I was thinking of asking for 3 people in the public, just as you did, Madam Chair, so I appreciate that and support it. But I've raised the question whether these should be ACPAC members or whether we should broaden it to public members who are fully engaged in environmental justice matters. I pulled up the roster that we were given back in February of ACPAC members, and their backgrounds are listed. And 3 of the members from DC listed their background in environmental justice involvement, 1 from Prince George's and 1 from Virginia. So if we want folks who are engaged in environmental justice, we better hope those 2 people from Maryland and Virginia are interested and have time. Not that the other people in ACPAC aren't fully capable in general, but I'm still asking the question, is ACPAC required to designate someone from ACPAC, or can they utilize activists who are, known community members or unknown community members, but very active community members who are engaged in the environmental justice space? I mean, I think it's important that we get people who are really involved. So that's sort of a question of, do we have to limit it to ACPAC, or can the 3rd person that we're adding be a non-ACPAC member? I'm not sure
I think that's a very good question. Yeah, very good question. I would think, this is just my opinion, that the APAC would actually do the so-called screening, and that is hopefully there'll be many candidates that would want to serve in the capacity and on the subcommittee, and so we would look for the public appointees to come through some process that we would ask that committee to set up. And maybe we need to have conversations with that committee as to how they would see it before we say absolute, this is what we want them to do. That's my quick response. And now we'll turn to Jen and Jeff to see what they have to say.
Ms. Bonds, if I understand you, I'd be fine with that if the ACPAC screened the folks, but they could be or not be ACPAC members.
Right, that's correct. That's why I'm saying before we can't impose on them, but we can say what is desired, how we would like them to function to assist impact MWAC in making this subcommittee, whole.
Jeff?
Well, a couple points. One, it's been longstanding practice at COG to fill these kinds of positions from our, existing citizen or public advisory committee. So any decision here potentially impacts, all of COG and other committees and subcommittees. So we need to be cognizant of that. Also, the concept of not including non-members doesn't preclude us from taking information from non-members. So we certainly intend to do outreach and engage with, the public that are not part of AgPAC. But I think our initial desire would be to keep the actual membership of the subcommittee to AgPAC members. And then secondly, engage with the public and other processes to gather information and input.
Yeah, I hear that. I would push back in this regard. This is a subcommittee on environmental justice, and ACPAC is not an advisory committee on environmental justice. It's got a broader range and a broader group of people, which is why I looked at the roster and identified, as noted in the backgrounds, how many folks on ACPAC are engaged or claim to be engaged. Now, maybe more people are, and it's just not in their backgrounds. It's listed, but I would push back on that. The second question I have is, at the end of the day, who makes the decisions on the, I'll call it 11 members now? Is that going to be the executive committee?
Well, interesting. I think Chair Bonds has the prerogative of making a motion as the chair on the process that she'd like to use for how to get the membership filled. I think its practice here has been for the chair of the governing, I don't know if governing is the right word, but the chair of the higher level committee. So the chair of MWAC would not become the chair of the subcommittee. The chair of MWAC would appoint, and the practice here has been, would appoint one of the vice chairs of MWAC to serve as the chair of the subcommittee. That's one thing that has been done here, but Chair Bonds could make a motion on a process. I think she has the power to potentially appoint all the members herself, but I'm not sure that's the way she'd like to proceed.
Well, Jeff, I agree with that, but I'd point out that I think next Tuesday is coming. So Ms. Bonds is going to have to move quick, or Wednesday. But I'll support whatever Ms. Bonds wants to do.
Tom, I appreciate that. And you should know that I am one of the most democratic beings that you ever had encountered. So with that said, I would think that it would be appropriate for those who really want to do this work, because this is not going to be easy. It's a new sort of venture that we have proposed and said we want to do. So I think those who would like to serve would, at least we should have at least one from Maryland, one from Virginia that would like to serve. And then we can go to whatever other systems that we have in order to make sure that the state agencies, I guess they would be appointed, could be appointed by their states, but having people who want to serve at least in this this 1 year proposition makes the most sense to me. So Jen, do you have some advice for us?
Well, what we could do, and I'll look to Jeff to make sure I'm not overspeaking, regarding membership, is following this meeting, we can send an email out to all MWAC members and ask for volunteers, and let's see who volunteers. And then at that point, we could then bring that back to the executive committee for their kind of final appointment on that. And then if we see that we have, not enough members from one jurisdiction, we can all get on the horn and do a little bit of outreach and try to get some volunteers for that, because we do want to make sure that we do have representatives across the region and across from all three of the jurisdictions. So if that's an appropriate place to start with soliciting volunteers first, we can start that process.
All right, does that work for everyone? Any discussion on that?
This is Colin Burrell here from DC. I agree with the general approach. However, I think consideration ought to be given to ensure that all three jurisdictions the state has representation there to ensure that there's some equity in the committee structure.
Most definitely, Mr. Morrell. That's where I would be. I'm not happy that we only have one for local jurisdictions, but we only have one District of Columbia. So.
But if the district pick up another membership from the public aspect, then I think it would at least give some measure of equity.
Yes, and that is the goal. The proposed membership structure you see on the before you now, I believe we are able to add one that would be appointed in that last category, public appointee. So that would help us. Yes, DC sticking together really help us.
Right, we will be happy with that in the district.
Thank you. All right. So, Jen, would you summarize where we are on this proposal? Because I think it is in order that we make a motion and we approve the recommendations. So if you could state what the recommendations are now.
Sure. So the proposal would be that we would be moving forward with the project activities that would occur over a 12-month period. That would include the finalization of the formation of the Environmental Justice Subcommittee and support for that subcommittee for the upcoming year, 12 months. It would include stakeholder engagement and discussions with MWAC members, with ACPAC members, and with an external group of stakeholders, and developing a final action plan to be delivered to MWAC. And then in addition to that, it would include the proposed membership structure would now be 11 members. It would include 5 members that would be local jurisdictions or local members, 3 members representing the states, and then 3 members representing the public ACPAC. And that the goal for ACPAC is 1 from Maryland, 1 from DC, and 1 from Virginia.
All right. So that is what is before us. Are there any further questions?
Just wanted to loop back and make sure that we were all on the same page in regards to the public members, that we have equitable representation, and also that the priority is ensuring that those 3 folks are folks with a deep background and expertise in environmental justice, including if we have to go outside, if ACPAC needs to go outside their own membership to find those folks.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, so now let's vote. All in favor of what is proposed for the structure of the subcommittee on environmental justice, signify with the sign of aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, opposed? All right, the ayes have it, and thank you very much for that. And we will expect at the February meeting, we will have a complete understanding in writing as to what we have approved so that we can move forward. We also should have at that time nominations or proposed memberships that will fulfill the subcommittee slots. Now we can move to item number 7, which is climate pollution reduction grant. And Mr. King is going to talk to us about that.
Great, thanks. So this next item is on a new EPA climate pollution reduction grant program, otherwise known as CPRG. Really interesting program. Next slide. So I'll give you at part 1 an overview. So the CPRG program is a dual track program. So there's a formula fund that's funding climate planning, climate plans that were given to states. So all states had the opportunity to get $3 million, and then a whole bunch of like 60 plus metropolitan statistical areas got $1 million each. So that's all formula funded to develop plan documents. I mentioned this a dual track program. The formula grants provide the money for these plans, but the real prize here is a competitive implementation grant, and the total nationwide funding is about $4.6 billion, 300 million, which is for tribal entities. So 4.3 billion available for competition between states and localities nationwide to implement projects to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. So really interesting program. I've never seen anything quite like it where we're getting paid to do the planning that would then lead to a proposal to get implementation funding. So really cool program in that regard. Next slide. And so in our case, for our region, again, keep in mind that there's a state level plan and then there's these MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area Plans. So COG, interestingly, was for some reason EPA purposefully excluded our MSA, the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia MSA, from the formula grant. So we actually are doing the MSA plan as a subrecipient to the District of Columbia state grant. So DC is as a state and locality doing a district-wide plan, and COG has been hired to develop the plan for the MSA. Interestingly, the MSA extends beyond the COG borders. So we're dealing with a bunch of our neighboring counties to the west and south. I won't read the whole list, but some interesting opportunity for us to develop some new relationships with our neighbors. So real interested to see how that process plays out, and including West Virginia. So we get Jefferson County, West Virginia as part of the MSA. Next slide. And so I mentioned this, current effort that COG is doing is on the planning grant. So we are on the hook by March 1st, 2024 to do what they call a PCAP, Priority Climate Action Plan. And the reason that PCAP is hyper important is in order to be eligible to apply for the implementation grant, the project has to be in the PCAP. And so right now, a lot of efforts going into thinking through what are folks interested in terms of implementation funding, and then making sure we get that into the PCAP and get the PCAP into EPA by March 1st, 2024. Down the road, after we do the PCAP, we then have to turn our attention to what they call the CCAP, so the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. And that just includes a bunch of other mandatory requirements for things we need to include in that plan. Won't get into that now, but so just keep in mind, we're currently working on the PCAP due March 1st. Next slide. And so I mentioned the PCAP is a plan. It really, the main purpose of this plan is focused on near-term, high-priority, implementation-ready measures. EPA wants the money out the door and the project shovel-ready. They want reductions, big reductions of greenhouse gases in the next 3 to 5 years. So real big focus on stuff that's ready to do. For the PCAP, we do not have to be comprehensive. We do not have to do a full-blown emission inventories, and we don't need to look at carbon sinks. Fortunately, in our region, we're not starting from scratch. We have, as most of you probably know, a 2030 Climate Energy Action Plan for the COG region. So we're not starting from scratch. Next slide. And this slide just shows you kind of what is required for the PCAP versus the CCAP for what needs to go into an implementation grant application. As you can see, the PCAP is a lower number of requirements that we need to put in, but there's still a few. Next slide. So next slide. So this next part, I'll get into how we're going about developing the measures. So again, this is all I focus on identifying those priority measures that we can put in the PCAP, the priority measures we want to link to things that can reduce emissions in the next 5 to 6 years. We want to make sure we're identifying the strategies that are already identified as priorities, shovel ready. We want them to be cost effective. The next bullet here is really important, as EPA does not want to fund things that already have federal funding for implementation. They're really looking for what are the gaps. So interesting challenge there, because as many of you know, there's all sorts of different funding, federal funding streams of available dollars for various things. So real interesting challenge to figure out what are the priority gaps to fill. One new thing for everyone on the call to become familiar with, you now know a couple new acronyms. You know the PCAP, you know the CCAP. The other one, the new acronym under this program is LIDAC, Low Income and Disadvantaged Communities. So this, as many of the federal initiatives coming out of the administration, a big focus on Justice 40, big focus on LIDAC. So we have to make sure this plan focuses on LIDAC, getting benefits to the LIDAC community. There's also, interestingly, a requirement that we make sure that whatever we put forth in the PCAP, we understand whether or not the folks who are identified as kind of the implementing agencies actually have the authority to implement the program. So next slide. And so I mentioned we're not starting from scratch. I feel really badly for many of the MSAs across the country that are starting from scratch. I just can't fathom how they're going to get all this work done in 2 months. At least in our case, we're starting with an existing 2030 Climate Energy Action Plan. So we've already done a lot of work over the years looking at all the various strategies and actions that folks have been prioritizing. The Transportation Planning Board in our region, TPB, has done a decade's worth of voluntary work on greenhouse gases, and including adoption of greenhouse gas emission reduction goals before the regulatory requirements even came into being. So we have the TPB's been thinking about various strategies and actions, but all 3 of our member states have state plans. Many of our local governments now have local climate action plans. And we have a fair number of experts across the region that really have a good handle on what the programs are and what the funding streams are, and can help us think through the gaps. Particularly given the hyper compressed timeline to get this PCAP done, EPA did not do us a favor in how they rolled this out, and they really didn't get the grants out, the planning grants out until like the September timeframe with a March deadline. So more than a year's worth of work to do in less than 3 months or so. So really big challenge. So when we kicked off the steering and technical committees to help guide this work for the CPRG PCAP, knowing that the real prize here is the implementation funding, and those proposals will be due April 1st, 2024. So a month after the PCAP submitted, if anybody wants funding, they have to have their proposals ready to go by April 1st. So again, not a lot of time. So we kicked it off with a call for projects. We said we can easily back into the PCAP measures if we know what folks across the region are identifying as projects they would like to propose in that competitive solicitation. So we put out a call for projects. The original deadline was Friday, December 1st. We extended it to today, and we've been getting lots and lots of really interesting project submissions. I have not yet gone top to bottom to read through them, but I know the staff who's receiving them and archiving them and starting to look at it are really excited that they're seeing lots of really good ideas flowing, and we'll be really interested in looking at the details of that in the coming days. Next slide. So I mentioned we're not starting from scratch. This is the table of all the priority collaborative actions that we included in our 2030 Climate Energy Action Plan. This was developed back in 2020 and adopted by the Climate Energy Environment Policy Committee here at COG. A bunch of strategy action areas. My sense is that we are not going to try to include all of this in the PCAP. Again, we want to identify what the priorities are, and my hunch is we're going to see a lot of interest in the clean electricity items. So things like help us fund deployment of on-site renewables, help us fund large-scale off-site renewables, that kind of thing. The clean renewable energy is going to be, I think, of high interest. I think there's going to be interest in what we can do more on energy efficiency in the built environment. So what can we do about our buildings? And so I think that's where we're going to see some of the prioritization. I do not think the PCAP is going to try to tackle all of this, but again, we haven't yet looked fully at the list of projects that's submitted. But next slide. And so in terms of the types of measures, the examples of the types of measures that EPA has identified as in their kind of guidance, really, I think our thinking is, again, I just mentioned that, is that we'll likely end up focusing on a subset of all those priority collaborative actions, and we'll likely look at particular sectors. So I already mentioned the electric power sector, the interest in renewables, what can we do more there? Interesting timing, the COG Board of Directors just adopted and maybe folks have seen it in the press, a new regional goal of 250,000 solar rooftops by 2030. So I could envision wanting to ask for funding to help us meet that goal, because that's a lot of solar to deploy in the next 6 years. And funding sources could help get that going. And again, I mentioned the building sector. I know there's a ton of interest in the transportation sector. It's kind of the largest slice of the pie in terms of our mission. It has the great co-benefit of improving air quality at the local level too. I think this one might be a little bit interesting question as to whether or not EPA would prioritize funding for transportation, given how much funding for transportation projects are coming out of the Federal Highway and the U.S. Department of Transportation. Making the case for a gap there might be a little tougher than some of the other areas. So I think we'll land likely in these types of sectors and these kinds of areas of focus. All the other sectors are eligible. And I know, for instance, we are seeing some interest from our water utilities in particular. And I think that makes a lot of sense because they're really big energy users and have lots of need for project support. So, but I don't know if, for instance, tree planting, I know is of an interest at the local level, but is that something that EPA would see as something that gets us emission reduction benefits in the next 3 years, for instance? Is that more of a longer term play for dealing with things like, forest protection and tree canopy coverage and the like? Next slide. So I mentioned the competitive grant. The notice of funding availability was released back in September. Proposals due April 1st. I mentioned we've done the call for projects. Again, that's the prize here, is to somehow get our region in a strong place to compete well for those dollars to actually implement good projects. Next slide. And the one thing to note here on this slide is that the eligibility is government. So state governments are eligible, local governments are eligible, the Council of Governments is eligible to be a lead applicant. And what EPA is saying, and it makes a lot of sense, is they don't want to fund, well, they don't want to see proposals from single jurisdictions. They want to see coalitions of governments coming together, or a state government on behalf of all of its jurisdictions coming together to propose. And you can imagine why. It's the sheer magnitude of the number of localities nationwide. This is not the way they want to manage it. So again, a lot of thinking right now is going on as to who is ready for the challenge of getting a proposal in by April 1st. So lots of conversations in Maryland, lots of conversations in Virginia, here at the COG. So interesting timing, and we have pretty much a month and a half now to get it all figured out. So again, I've already mentioned that the grants must implement greenhouse gas reduction projects. So that's the name of the game here, is find a way to get quick reductions at scale. And all of the applications are going to be evaluated in light of the priority for LIDAC benefits. Next slide. And EPA is putting some big dollars out there. Interesting, they're gonna look for geographic diversity across the country, or representation across the country. They're going to look for magnitude diversity across the country. So they have tiers of grant ranges, and each tier is going to be handled as like a separate bucket. And so the lowest level of grant they'll give out is $2 million. And interestingly, the highest is $500 million. So real interesting range here. I think that their region and our 4 states are going to land somewhere between 2 million and 500 million in terms of the proposals that are submitted. I'm confident of that. So next slide. These are the evaluation criteria that EPA is going to use to rank and score and make selections on the awards. Again, they really want greenhouse gas emission reduction, and they want them fast. They want some emphasis on LIDAC, and they want good environmental results. And clearly, they always look for folks who have proven past performance and able to get the job done. Next slide. And this one still, I think, is confusing a lot of people. It's about as clear as mud sometimes as to what is going on here. But I think in general, you're allowed to submit one application as an individual applicant, one individual as a lead applicant for a coalition, but you can serve on as many coalitions as a partner on multiple applications. So, but with that, they also, EPA is, I mentioned they want diverse geographic coverage, but they're also very concerned that they don't want to double pay. So they're not going to award multiple grants to the same measure in the same location. So, so there's a lot of thinking now of, how to position the localities and the states and multiple states and the multiple projects ideas, how is that all going to come together for a potential successful implementation funding application? Next slide. And so I mentioned we did a call for projects. The framework of the request is on this slide, that these are the things we're asking all of our members to get back to us on. And I'm not going to read through the slide, but it's kind of the basics that we need to know to understand what it is they're thinking. But again, it's the basics. To do the actual grant application for the funding, they're going to have to get in much more detail than this. But next slide. And so as part of our kickoff, we gave a project example. So for instance, one of the things that I had been thinking is, we have across the region some really good examples of solar co-ops and solarized programs where you get groups of neighbors together to go work together to put solar on their houses. This dovetails nicely with the new goal of 250,000 solar rooftops. It's a good program because it's existing, and it's something that does have a funding gap and could be expanded rapidly. It keys into our built environment and our renewable energy goals. We don't really need any new policies to make it happen. We have good models across the region of teams and coalitions that are already doing good work and could really supercharge it and ramp it up quickly to do more. So we kind of put this out there as a good example. And sure enough, one of our first project proposals coming in from the Northern Virginia Regional Commission was to do just that, is to supercharge the Solar Nova program, which does not only renewables, but they do energy audits of people's homes, big focus on low-income communities, energy efficiency investments to lower the energy consumption in the home and save homeowners money. So I think it kind of checks a lot of the boxes what EPA is looking for. Next slide. And this just kind of continues on the example of what the kinds of information we want to see in the project proposals. So next slide. So next steps. I mentioned we kicked things off in November. We gave background and guidance on the program, the planning program. We put out the call for projects in December. Now that we have starting to see all the project ideas, we're going to pull them together and think through how to kind of stack and rack them and prioritize them and bundle them. And we will then be taking, we're not going to have the steering committee meet in December. We're going to do a check-in via email where we'll send them out kind of the master list that we pulled together from the projects and ask for some guidance. And then we're going to have to get that all tidied up and wrapped up and ready for approval, review and approval of the PCAP in January, probably late January, to get us in a good position to kind of finish it and complete it and get it submitted by March 1st. So next slide. The technical committee's where the work's going to really happen in the next 2 weeks. The next technical committee is December 15th, I think at 2 o'clock, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock. And at that meeting is when we're going to really roll up our sleeves and take a hard, close look at what are the projects that have been submitted and how we want to package that up for the PCAP. We also are doing some public and stakeholder engagement initiatives. I think on the 18th, December 18th, we have an afternoon meeting with key stakeholders like water utilities and educational institutions, et cetera. And in the evening is when we're going to have an invitation that has already gone out to a whole bunch of EJ stakeholder groups across the region. So we'll initiate our stakeholder engagement with the EJ community in the evening on the 18th. We have ICF under contract supporting us. They are working closely with us in designing some other stakeholder engagements yet to be determined, including, I think we're going to hopefully host should be a really interesting engagement at the Piscataway Park with the tribal community. So we're interested in working with the MWAQC Foundation on that. And so COG's really busy. The ICF team and COG staff are really cranking here. We like I said, we're starting to see these survey results come in. And we have to put pen to paper right away to kind of get that into shape to share with the technical committee and kind of move towards a January adoption. And we'll be doing a lot of engagement work in the next 3 to 5 weeks. And then ICF will support us in any of the supporting analysis that we need. Next slide. And this just shows the timeline. I think the key message here is a year's worth of work in a month. So we pretty much have now till mid to late January to get the PCAP done and ready to tidy up, giving us a little bit of cushion. If it goes into February, it's probably okay, but we do not want to find ourselves in late February still scratching our heads, figuring out what we want to do. We really need some clarity, in part because if we're going to be successful in implementation funding, that has to be pretty tight by the February-March timeframe to meet that April 1st deadline. So, and it all has to go hand in hand. And in fact, the implementation grant application needs to explicitly refer to what page in the PCAP that the project is identified, because it has to be in the PCAP to be eligible. Next slide. So if anybody has any ideas or suggestions, you can email Alyssa Boggs here at COG or myself. There's the email, open to any suggestions and ideas you may have. Next slide. I think that was it. So if you put that other slide back up. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that interesting and very important presentation. I do have a question, and when we talk about the I guess it's the LIDAC input, I was just wondering if we had given thought to reaching out to our public housing communities, our senior citizens. They would tend to perhaps fall into this category. Those persons that receive SNAP benefits, having input from that group might help, and maybe AARP for our seniors. That could give us some input if we want to go in that direction.
Yeah, interesting. We've at this point, COG is relying on our state and local governments to do some of that liaison work. So, for instance, I know in the case of the Commonwealth of Virginia, the group there, leading the planning effort for the PCAP for the Commonwealth of Virginia, are doing just that. They've engaged with all the various key agencies, including housing, energy office, and the like. But really good point. And I think there's likely some fertile ground there, given the importance of energy burden in such housing and our opportunity to really make a difference, both in terms of the quality of housing for our citizens and seniors, as well as the energy burden impact and the air cleaning impact. So good suggestion. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, hearing none and recognizing that we are a few minutes past our appointed adjournment hour, I will say this concludes our meeting today, and our next meeting is scheduled virtually on February 28th. And thanks to everyone for your participation. And I can accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you. So moved. Thank you. We're adjourned. Enjoy the holidays that are before us, and work hard to keep our air clean as we can. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.